Meet former CBS News president and media innovator Andrew Heyward next on Carpe Diem. Hello, I'm Merrill Brown, Director of the School of Communication and Media at Montclair State University. On this edition of Carpe Diem, our guest is former CBS News President Andrew Heyward. Heyward served as Network News President for almost a decade, the second longest tenure of any president of CBS News. Prior to assuming that role, he was executive producer of the CBS Evening News and launched the news magazine 48 Hours. Heyward has brought tremendous innovation to the media industry over the years. Today, as a consultant to media companies, he's become a leader in digital initiatives and speaking out on important news industry issues. Andrew, welcome to Montclair State University.
Very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out here today. We're glad to have you and enthusiastic about all you're going to say to the faculty and students in our later sessions. And it's important to the university to have you visit, so thank you again. Let's start with just your summing up your CBS News era, and it's now been a number of years since you were there, but you've had time to reflect on an exciting, turbulent, change-filled period at CBS News. How do you look back on that?
Yeah, there's a lot to think about. I was at CBS News for almost 25 years, and as you said in your very kind introduction, president for about 10 of those. I started out as a segment producer on the CBS Evening News 2 weeks after Dan Rather took over. That was an historic milestone in CBS News history, the stepping down of Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather's succession. And over the next 25 years, the news industry itself changed enormously. Probably more than network television itself changed, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. Certainly there were many highlights and a few lowlights. It was a great privilege to lead a national news organization during 3 presidential elections, including the very troubling and troubled one of 2000. It was also a privilege to oversee coverage of 9/11, which was such a horrible tragedy for this country and for the world. And I think a moment for network news to actually live up to its potential to unite the country at a time of tragedy. There were also a lot of programming initiatives. You mentioned 48 Hours. That was probably the most fun I ever had, was putting together a great group of men and women who wanted to try something new, and we had leadership that encouraged us to innovate, and the program has now changed somewhat. It's now a very well done crime show called 48 Hours Mystery, but when we started it in the late 80s, it was an instant documentary program that was very innovative and distinctive and became quite influential, so that was also very rewarding. But along the way, as I said, it was a chance to have a front row seat at the dawn of the internet and the rise of not only 24-hour cable in the 80s, but all the choices that people have for news today. And to think about what that means for the news consumer is something that was fascinating then, and as you pointed out in your intro, continues to fascinate me now.
During your early years at CBS News was still a dominant voice in a limited number of voices that had access to the airwaves. Obviously, by the time you left, there was massive competition from cable. NBC and ABC were all competitive with you in a number of ways. How do you view that change in the competitive scene?
I think it's very good for the news consumer. It certainly creates challenges for the news provider. As you point out, Merrill, the television network news divisions really grew up in a kind of oligopolistic environment. There were only 3 networks. And because of technology, it was very technological obstacles. Covering and distributing television news was very difficult and very expensive. So there were enormous barriers to entry for anybody else who wanted to do it. It's hard to believe now because we take for granted that if the second anything happens, if a plane lands on the Hudson, we'll see the video a few minutes later, not only from professional news providers, but from amateurs who can upload it from their smartphones. Well, in the 80s, if that had happened, you might, certainly the local station would cover it, but if you lived in a city other than New York, you literally had to wait until the CBS Evening News came on, or ABC or NBC, to see the full story. national and international news was the exclusive province of these network newscasts. So that created an environment in which they could become very powerful, very influential. I'm afraid to say it also allowed them to become a little bit arrogant sometimes about their role in the media conversation. And now everybody realizes that they're just several of multiple choices, and that has changed the tone. Instead of dominating the conversation, your hope is to participate in it.
And yet, people, even during the later years of your tenure and since, have written off the nightly news programs that are the franchise of broadcast news networks. They remain fairly strong, significantly profitable, and if I'm not mistaken, last year actually had an uptick in audience for the first time in a number of years. So they continue to be important franchises, and that's part of, I guess, your legacy and that of others.
I think that's absolutely right. The three evening newscasts collectively attract between 20 and 21 million people a night. You put that together and think of that as one television show, that's an enormous hit. They're still very influential. However, their audience does skew quite old. The history of American media innovation is that new forms eventually find a way to coexist with the old ones, or old ones adapt and find a way to coexist with the new ones in a constantly changing ecosystem. So radio didn't go away when television came along, movies didn't go away when TV came along, and so on. And the same is true of the evening newscasts. They have lasted and they retain value for those 20, 21 million people. They do generate significant revenue as well, and they really are the spine of the news gathering organizations that these networks still maintain, although the organizations are smaller than they were. I think the real change, though, is that for the next generation, the notion of having a news organization, a newspaper or a network, organize your world for you, that's truly out of date. And I think that's been a little bit underestimated as a result of the digital revolution. People focus on user-generated content, but I think the real change is what I call user-generated context, meaning that the individual user gets to decide for herself how to organize her news and information choices, no longer dependent on the front page of the New York Times or the CBS Evening News to do that. So what used to happen is that when young people got to be a certain age and had children of their own who were going to school, started paying taxes and so on, they would take on the media habits of their parents, including sitting down and watching the news. That doesn't happen anymore. The next time my kids plan to watch a network evening newscast is never.
And yet, young people consume news in significant quantities in ways different from their parents. They get it from the internet, as we know. They get it from Jon Stewart. They get it on demand, even from CBS and other people. How do you assess the marketplace for news in the context of those observations?
The marketplace for news is extremely robust, exactly as you point out. The problem is that it's a marketplace where a lot of the goods are underpriced. The real challenge for news providers is getting people to pay for the content, to pay what it costs. When you had this oligopoly that we talked about a few minutes ago, it wasn't really a problem because everybody had a large enough market share to sustain a very viable business. Now that you have a fragmenting marketplace and you have a lot of content that's available for nothing, getting consumers to pay the freight is difficult. So that and advertising dollars, while they are moving in significant numbers to online and mobile platforms, do not in any way match what they were or what they are still in network television. We can talk about the reasons for that if you want, but that poses significant issues. The businesses were built around a different kind of cost structure than what current revenues can sustain over the long haul.
They were also built under a different editorial and point of view structure. You yourself have been a proponent of trying to get television news to take more of a point of view, but probably not in the mode of, say, Fox and MSNBC, which clearly have ideological points of view, not simply journalistic points of view. As you look at the dominance of editorial points of view in TV news today, how does that make you as a traditional journalist feel?
I have mixed feelings about it. First of all, I'm a big believer in the marketplace speaking, and I think it's not up to middle-aged men wearing suits to decide, or at least certainly be the sole deciders of what people get to see and hear and read. So I think that there's obviously a market for strong opinion on television. In fact, news arguably is migrating not only to cable, but migrating towards point of view, which, by the way, is much more consistent with the history of American journalism. This notion of the objective, journalist, who doesn't reveal in any way what he or she thinks about issues is relatively new. It's really a post-World War II phenomenon, and we're now arguably going back to what really is what has been more consistently the history of journalism in this country. I think it's disturbing to this in the sense that our democracy is founded on a town meeting model where citizens are supposed to reach rough consensus based on a common set of facts. If everybody is allowed to cocoon themselves in a kind of echo chamber that just plays back their own biases and preconceptions, and really if everybody's underexposed to facts that contradict those points of view, that is not good for the democracy, and it makes me concerned as a citizen. At the same time, as I said, the marketplace gets to speak. You can't suddenly legislate away opinion-driven news organizations. You have to make people care about news that is reported without fear or favor or ideological bias, and make that viable in people's lives. And you have to make them understand the difference. Or not make them, you can't make them. You have to encourage them to understand the difference and to actually be able to sort out what is believable and why.
When you sit down at 9 o'clock at night and want to watch television news, and you see that your fundamental choices are Sean Hannity, Rachel Maddow, and Piers Morgan, how does that make you feel as both a consumer and a television journalist?
Great chance to catch episode 2 of Showtime on Homeland. I mean, of Homeland on Showtime, I should say. I don't think that, so for me, again, I'm a traditional news consumer as well as news executive. I don't have a viable choice there at 9 o'clock. There's not something that I would really gravitate to. But again, what's interesting, you raise the evening news issues. People say, well, the evening news, the problem is it's on too early for me. I'm not home at 6:30. Yeah, no one's home at 6:30, but at least 2 of the 3 are streamed online, and you could sit down and watch them very easily. Or, of course, many people have DVRs and could time shift them, and that isn't really happening. So if I really wanted to sit down and watch a newscast at 9 o'clock, I could either stream or DVR a network evening newscast. I think the real issue is that, like you, by 9 o'clock, I'm very familiar with the news of the day. I've been consuming it while doing other things all day long. So I don't feel a need to tune into a newscast. And that, of course, is another reason why opinion becomes very appealing, because if you know the news already, there's got to be something else that a news organization adds. It's interesting to see that CNN, which is a terrific news organization, is struggling a little bit right now in prime time for this reason. The value proposition of CNN has been, we cover the news, we actually don't skew right or left. But the middle isn't that interesting at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night, at least to a lot of viewers who prefer to have some piquancy in the sauce.
Let's come back to CBS for just a couple of minutes. You helped develop the career of their current anchor, Scott Pelley, who seems to have stabilized that time period for CBS. How do you assess where Pelley, that program, and CBS is in the news discussion today?
I actually think that Pelley and his producer, Pat Shevlin, are doing a terrific job. It is quite a traditional program, and I say that as a compliment. The people at CBS News, I think, have correctly decided that the evening news audience likes the evening news to do what the evening news has traditionally done, which is to seriously, soberly, responsibly sum up the national and international issues and try to shed some additional light, explanatory light on them. And I think Pelley does a great job. It's very simply and clearly written. The layout is very logical. The graphics are clean. The story selection is good. And I say this not as a homer, rooting for my alma mater, because I think the other evening newscasts are good as well. But what you are seeing is a good thing in the market, which is some differentiation where you do have, somewhat different flavor when you're choosing among Diane Sawyer, Brian Williams, and Scott Pelley. And I think that Scott Pelley, is very much, and he would say the same thing, I think, very much in keeping with the CBS News tradition. They even have borrowed some of Walter Cronkite's graphic elements. If you look, you'll see some Cronkite-like elements in the animation. So they're very consciously part of a timeline, a consistent CBS News timeline, and I think they're doing well. They're not trying to be anything other than a really solid, informative, well-reported summary of the day's news, and I think that's working, and that, as you say, Merrill, they have stabilized what had been a difficult period for CBS News when there was more experimentation going on. That said, the genre over the last really probably 20 years now, in total has been declining, as you pointed out in one of your questions earlier. So while you're right, it's now somewhat stable in total viewers. There's a continuing decline in younger viewers, and over time, very slowly, I think you're going to see an erosion in the size of the evening news audience for the reason that we said, that the next generation is not going to feel that it needs that kind of summary, which means that news organizations like CBS News and its competitors are increasingly looking for other ways to reach viewers and online users.
We touched on all that you accomplished and all that you lived through at CBS News during the rather transitions in building the career of Scott Pelley and nurturing the 16...
By the way, don't give me too much credit for building the career of Scott Pelley. I was a big supporter of Scott Pelley, but Scott Pelley built his own career. He's a very talented news person. He deserves everything he's got, and I certainly, I wish him well, but I wish I could take credit for his success.
Certainly nurturing and even accelerating the growth of 60 Minutes, but you found yourself in the headlines more than at any other point in your CBS News career around the story about President George W. Bush's military service. Tell us about that saga and how it impacted your life and career.
And I didn't realize this was a 5-hour program here at Montclair State, but no, I'll be happy to, only because it's something that enough time has elapsed, I can be pretty objective about it. I said there were lowlights, and this certainly was one, not just for me, but for everybody involved. This, for those who don't remember, this was a very controversial story that aired in 2004 on 60 Minutes 2 about, as you say, President Bush's National Guard service around the time of the Vietnam War. And the issue that arose very quickly after the story aired was that documents at the center of the story, purported to be memos from his commanding officer, turned out to be of suspect origin. We still don't know to this day, it's almost 10 years later, certainly 8 years later, whether they were in fact genuine. It's never been proved that they were forgeries or genuine, but that's not an acceptable standard for a news organization. You can't base a story on documents and then find out, as we did, that there hadn't been enough checking and reporting about their origin and their authenticity to meet the standards of CBS News. So that ended up being more than an embarrassment, really a scandal. And there was people had to leave the company. There was a large external investigation, trying to get to the bottom of it, and it was very hard for all involved. I think I stayed on for another year after that, and until the end of my contract. And one of the things that I'm proud of is that and again, I can't take credit for this, but we started. We made it a very high priority to not only restore internal morale. Let's face it, the overwhelming majority of CBS News people were not involved with this in any way. There were a very small group of people responsible. But also, our most important relationship is the one with the viewers. And CBS's credibility had been called into question because we were accused of political bias. So the good news is that even the external report did not find any political bias, but it did find some egregious journalistic errors. And CBS News very quickly set about the business of restoring its credibility, and I think that's been a big success, meaning that there's no one walking around now saying that CBS News somehow is, well, let's put it this way, there's always people who feel there's political bias in network news, and not just at CBS, but I don't think there's any ongoing legacy of that particular story. I think that CBS News has put it in the past. I think we addressed it, as painful as it was. I was in the hard position of trying to do two things, which was support my journalists, but at the same time get to the bottom of something that seemed to be problematic. And the more we dug, Merrill, the more it was obvious that something was wrong. So after about 10 days, and I wish it had been even quicker than that, we did have to pull back from the story, and that obviously created a lot of controversy. And some of the other people who were involved in it, if they were sitting here, would give you a very different perspective and say that we never should have pulled back. But I feel very strongly that there were errors committed. CBS News did the right thing in taking responsibility. People paid a big price for it, and the organization has successfully moved on.
You have not told that story particularly aggressively in your own defense, or at least in your own explanation. Will you ever tell that story from your point of view and how it looked from where you sat?
I guess the answer is no. I want to be courteous and answer your question, but almost everybody involved has moved on, including people who left, with whom I'm still in touch. And I think that's a much healthier way to look at it. I think there was an exhaustive external report. I thought the firm, there was a lawyer and also a former head of the AP, Lou Bacardi, there was a former Attorney General of the U.S., Richard Thornburg, and a former head of the AP, Lou Bacardi, who spearheaded the report. I thought they did an excellent job, as harsh as it was. So I think there is a public record of what happened. I don't think the world is waiting to hear what Andrew Heyward has to say about it. But I also feel that, if anything, to try to put it in a more positive light, as I said, the fact that the organization was able to deal with this wound, acknowledge the fundamental covenant with the viewers that there's nothing more important than our credibility, that if we say something is true, we have to have done the work to justify our belief that it is true and be able to back up what we say with solid reporting. There's nothing more important than that, and the organization is thriving. So in that sense, I feel that we don't really have to dwell on it. To the degree that there are lessons, I think they've been very, very strongly absorbed by anybody in the organization and people who are involved. And I'll give you an interesting example, and push back if you disagree with this, but the fact that Katie Couric's interview with Sarah Palin in the 2008 campaign was really, I think, a critical moment, at least in the media coverage of the campaign. And it happened with no accusations, or certainly very minimal accusations, that there was any political bias. To me, was a great sign that the organization had successfully moved on in the eyes of its viewers. Because you could imagine a scenario where critics would say, oh, well, here goes CBS again, just trying to stick it to the Republicans. And that was actually not the case. People took the interview at face value. I thought Katie did a great job with it. It was a very important interview in terms of giving viewers a chance to see Sarah Palin's strengths and weaknesses. And it was done not in a swirl of political controversy at all, which to me says that 4 years later or 3 years after the report came out, CBS News had moved on, and I'm trying to do the same thing.
That raises the very interesting topic as we sit here in an election season of the media's role in the current election. In fact, the media has become an issue again in general, with lots of people on actually both sides of the political spectrum pointing fingers at media credibility and media racing to stories and media attempting in the eyes of the right to re-elect the president. How do you feel the media is doing in this context of the election year?
Well, I think it's a complicated question. I'll try to give a simple answer. The answer is overall well. As you pointed out earlier in setting the context for this discussion, there are so many more outlets now for media that it's like going into a superstore and you can find absolutely anything you want. If you want your own opinions reinforced, there are places to do that. If you want to dig in and find out what the candidates think, including at a very, very granular level, or what their policy positions are, you can certainly do that. So the information that's available to consumers is just unprecedented in our lifetimes.
And yet, in the context of traditional media, credibility has never been lower. How do you square that?
That's a great question, and I wonder, I don't have a glib answer to it. I think it is because, a couple of things. One, to the degree that news media has become more pointed and more point of view oriented, that is irritating to people who don't agree with that point of view, and they see that as less credible than what they'd like to see. But of course, they might see media that agrees with them as more credible. But certainly, that I think is one factor. A second is that the whole national dialogue around politics has become, I hate to say it, dumbed down. And I think, unfortunately, television has a role in that. Television lends itself better to short, pithy statements. We have the luxury of sitting here for 28 minutes and 20 seconds. But most times when politicians talk, they know that they're going to be at the mercy of an editor who's going to end up cutting something that's 7 to 11 seconds long. And so that's going to emphasize slogans. That's going to emphasize oversimplifications. And viewers are smart, and they know that what they're seeing under, even though it's called news, is something a little bit more like sloganeering and advertising. Now that's the content, it's not what the reporters are doing, but I think to some degree the credibility of the news media comes from a kind of degeneration in the political dialogue. And finally, commercial news media are under enormous pressure to maintain or grow, if they can, circulation. And when you chase ratings, you're sometimes going to chase stories that aren't necessarily the most important, or you're going to put a more sensational or commercial or even tabloid spin on a story. And when you do that, people might draw some salacious pleasure from it, but at the same time, it hurts credibility. So I would say those are the factors. But again, it's a complicated question. I'm not sure what the answer is. I do agree that journalists should find it very sobering that they seem to continue to fall in the estimation of the American public, even while their own sense of themselves continues to grow.
But don't you feel like at some level the media is not fulfilling its responsibility during the campaign to really delve into the issues? I mean, you and I can go to the websites of the major candidates and get fairly deep position papers on just about anything.
I actually don't think that there's a shortage of information, and when you say you and I can go, so can anybody else. So it's not, it's not a privilege reserved for us. This information is available, in-depth information for people who want it. And I actually think if you look at what major national newspapers are doing, and certainly what the networks have done, there's a lot of reporting on issues. That said, your point is excellent. The cacophony drowns it out.
What would your advice be to students in a media school who are thinking about how they should focus their career intentions?
I think it's an enormously exciting time. I think the students should take the name of this program and make it their slogan, which is Carpe Diem, seize the day. You have an absolute flowering of opportunity as long as people are willing to think hard about all the different forms of reporting and storytelling and distribution that exist. The barriers to entry for journalists have fallen. Anybody can create content, anybody can distribute content. We could start a website today, and if it was good, it could be disseminated all over the world and become popular and influential.
Although we'd be unlikely to get rich.
We'd be unlikely to get rich. So I think that I wouldn't say that it's as obvious a career path as it is obvious. There are, instead of one road up the mountain, there are many twisty roads up the mountain, and you have to bring your machete with you and cut some underbrush out of the way. But I think the students here, I would encourage them to really learn how to use all the different forms of media that are available and figure out how to integrate them into a new form of storytelling. Invent the next 60 minutes. It hasn't been done yet.
Andrew, thanks for joining us today at Carpe Diem, and thank you for watching. If you'd like information on this or any edition of Carpe Diem, write us at carpediem@mail.montclair.edu or call us at 973-655-5158. I'm Merrill Brown. For all of us at the School of Communication and Media at Montclair State University, thanks for watching Carpe Diem.